In January, Paris was faced with a series of terrorist attacks, including 12 dead at satirical political magazine Charlie Hebdo. The terrorists who attacked the magazine are believed to have been reacting to its controversial depictions of Muhammad. This sparked widespread demonstrations, both in memory of the victims and in support of freedom of speech. Nearly a year has passed now, and Paris still faces widespread tension related to the inclusion and socioeconomic status of its Muslim population. Terrorist attacks like those in January present a major roadblock for Muslim inclusion in France. When these issues become intertwined with topics like freedom of speech, unemployment, and separation of church and state, the conversation becomes a complicated one. That conversation can have profound implications for the Muslim youth who grew up in its midst, affecting their identity, whether or not they feel a part of France, and whether or not they thrive socially and economically. With the attacks on Charlie Hebdo bringing freedom of speech to the center of discussion, France's law banning Muslim veils in public schools comes into play. This ban is part of a broader law which bans the wearing of any conspicuous symbol with religious affiliation in public schools, excluding universities. And it's meant to protect laïcité, the French constitutional separation of church and state. Laïcité is also an integral French value. Because of this, the law is met with high rates of approval, and most hope it will prevent youth in primary and secondary schools from being subjected to religious influence. However, for those who view the wearing of Muslim veils or any religious symbol as freedom of expression, the law can represent a degree of revoked autonomy. Noura Jabala, a Muslim and women's rights activist, says, "What happened in France was that other women and other men confiscated the speech of Muslim women and spoke in their place. By consequence, it was not because of the veil that women were excluded, that they were shut in their houses. It was because of a larger political agenda and the will of people who wanted to liberate women. Instead of liberating them, they enclosed them." Moving towards French schools, religion, in keeping with laïcité, is a traditionally taboo subject for public schools. However, following the attacks on Charlie Hebdo, there was a need for some explanation of the events which had occurred. For some, this opened the floor for religious dialogue in classrooms, giving students a chance to have a more open and honest discussion, and perhaps one quite necessary to stronger religious inclusion. On the other hand, some noticed the opposite, with students reluctant to discuss the issue, and Muslim students fed up with justifying their religion each time a terrorist disguised violence as Islam. The reality for most of these issues is that they are centered in poorer areas of France. For well-off areas and urban centers, inclusion may pose no problem, and Muslim youth may be as integrated as any other youth. However, in areas like the poor Paris suburbs known as banlieue, these problems can be quite real and exacerbated by poverty and socioeconomic divide. For many French citizens, any resentment they hold towards their Muslim counterparts is not religious in nature at all. Rather, it may come from a socioeconomic frustration towards poor Muslims perceived to be living off the state or presenting a burden to society. Considering this, workplace discrimination must be taken into account. New reports show that Muslims are 2.5 times less likely to get a job in France. This vicious cycle has profound effects on the identity of Muslim youth, sometimes causing them to fold in on themselves or withdraw from society. These sources of attention are diverse, controversial, and extremely intertwined. Their relativity means they may present tremendous issues in some areas and be practically non-existent in others. However, activists, religious cohesion groups, and individuals work toward a more inclusive and peaceful society. The role of a new generation in participating in those attempts to address these issues remains to be seen. Reporting for the Pulitzer Center on Crisis Reporting, this is Charlotte Bellomy.